Revolutionary talk for revolutionary times. Promoting peace, liberty, and prosperity around the clock. LibertyTalk.fm.
Welcome to Living the Solution with Dr. Elena George. Today we have a part 2 of our conversation about C60. I thought that was a really enlightening show, and I think it gave people a foundation to start thinking outside of the box. You know, as a physician and in the healthcare profession, we spend a lot of time, my colleagues, just writing prescriptions and not taking the time to actually think about the patient as a whole person. And quite frankly, as a biological being, cellular processes, everything that goes on in the cell. And I think last week we discussed it, and I truly believe we are self-healing if we give our body the foundation and the nutrients and the building blocks it needs to help itself. So today I wanted to revisit C60. And when Patty Greer was on last time, we talked about having her partner come on who can speak more about the science of this. So we're going to welcome Mr. Chris Burr today. And he's just a wealth of information. And Chris, I want to welcome you to the show, because I think this is going to be just an extension of how enlightening it was last time. I think people can really follow something if they understand the nuance. And I think that's what you're going to be able to provide. So thank you for coming on.
Elena, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to share whatever information and insights I might have with you and your audience.
Well, thank you for your time. Let's start off. How did you come to this? What made you start this process of C60, and how'd you discover it?
It's a very long story, actually. So when I always knew I was going to be an entrepreneur, I didn't know how quickly that was going to happen. When I was still in college at the University of Houston, I met my business partner, Robert Wong, and we became good friends, and he's very entrepreneurial minded. And at one point he was doing some separation actually on C60 for a professor, Paul Chu. He's actually real famous in the superconductivity world. And in fact, there's a building on the University of Houston campus that we call Chu's Castle. And of course, it's focused on superconductivity because that building was built because of Dr. Chu. And Robert was working in that building. He was separating really C60 from other fullerenes. And we'll talk about what those are here in a second. I don't know how much detail you got in on the last broadcast with Patty. But Dr. Chu came in one day and said, hey, my business partner, Robert, was working with a friend of his, Diego, in that lab. And he goes, hey, you guys are young guys. Why don't you, and this material at the time was selling for $6,000 a gram, which is just insane. And they're like, hey, this is a really expensive material. You guys are young kids. You should go start a business manufacturing this material. And as I mentioned, Robert is very entrepreneurial. It didn't take him very long to do some calculations and go, okay, I'm going down this path. He and I knew each other from physics class. I was at the time studying mechanical engineering, so had the background needed to really help from an engineering perspective, how to build this equipment. Some of it was as simple as drawings, so that we could go to machine shops and have things built. And other things were, the process of making C60 involves vaporizing graphite rods. And graphite is one of the hardest materials on the planet to vaporize. And so it takes local temperatures of the sun. And it's not just like, oh, you can vaporize these in open air and collect the soot that comes off. You actually have to do it in a chamber where all the oxygen has been removed, and then actually has to operate at a slight vacuum for optimal performance. And so all of these kind of pieces of engineering design challenges, he and I kind of put our heads together and solved. And really, we built the most productive fullerene production equipment. And we still use the same design today, and it's still the best design some 31 years later. That's really how we got into kind of manufacturing fullerenes in general and C60 more specifically.
Well, I've know a little bit about fullerenes. It's a structure that can hold carbon. Am I correct?
Well, so fullerenes are entirely made of carbon. So the best way
Okay.
to think about them is if you think about the most abundant one, which is carbon 60. And if you imagine a soccer ball where the lines on the soccer ball represent the bonds between the carbon atoms. So you have a spherical molecule of 60 carbon atoms. It was discovered here in Houston at Rice University, very prestigious university, by three professors in 1985. And those three professors went on to win the Nobel Prize in 1996 for that discovery. The material's amazing. It's harder than a diamond. It'll turn into a diamond. It makes great inks, batteries, tires, and photocells. And that's really why they won the Nobel Prize. It's comprised entirely of carbon. It's 60 carbon atoms. And again, with that shape of a soccer ball, there's a void in the middle. And that void is big enough for any atom on the periodic chart to fit inside of it, which is pretty amazing. There's actually a new symbol in chemistry that didn't exist before. You can have something like lanthanum at C60. That's the symbol that we're familiar with in our email addresses and has now been added to chemistry. Lanthanum at C60 means a lanthanum atom physically trapped inside of it, not covalently or ionically bonded to the exterior. Sorry, I'm being a little geeky here, but and then when you produce C60, you are always producing other fullerenes, and those include C70, C76, C80, C84, and the next most abundant is C70. So you got C60 that looks like a soccer ball, and then you got C70 that looks like an oblong soccer ball. So it's not complete rugby shape, but it's more rugby shape-ish, and that's kind of the majority of fullerenes.
So your product, if you think about C60, and there's a difference, isn't there? Something that you use from a industrial standpoint, I guess, versus something that people can take. I understand there is a difference, and your product has separated that. Is that correct?
Yeah, really, we like to make a demarcation at the point where you're willing to put, and I think, as a physician, you would agree, at the point when you're willing to put something in your body, your standards should change, right? Like, so to have something lying around your house, great. Maybe even to rub it on your skin, although we could certainly debate that. That's, a very absorbing organ. But if you're going to decide to consume it now all bets are off. You got to start paying attention. You got to start digging into the details and understanding what you're consuming. We like to think of, and it's appropriate to think of, C60 for industrial applications. And there's actually peer-reviewed published research that shows if you improperly process C60, it's harmful. If you're going to consume it, we break that off. And this is really like C60 Evo. The evolution of C60 is if you're going to consume it, you're going to consume ESS60, which is C60 that's been processed for safer human consumption. And that is the demarcation that we've really made in the industry.
Well, that's a big one because there's a lot of different products out there. And from what I've read, there may not be the same attention to detail. They're solvents, am I correct, in some of these products that you don't have, that you've taken the time to clean the product, to clean it up. So it's pure.
Yeah, I think I've got an example that probably addresses what you're suggesting. So there was one point where in an email thread, so I could still pull this up, but one individual guy who was not our customer, actually, he was like, hey, I'm taking this one product, we'll call it product A, and I'm thinking about switching to product B. By the way, neither A or B were our products. What do you think? Right. And my response was, well, let me tell you a story about product A. We used to sell them C60. In fact, we sold them industrial C60. This was very early on when it had kind of really just come onto the scene as a supplement. And when we realized that this particular customer, company A was actually taking industrial grade C60, dissolving it in oil and selling it to their customers, we had a call with them and we wanted to understand the process. Were they doing this kind of final step that would turn it into what we would call ESS60? And we didn't get any confidence about that. So we stopped selling them material. So I'm sharing this in that email thread, right? So company A, I would never buy from them, and unless I was going to, put it in my engine or something. And then, by the way, you're asking about company B. The reality is, if you trust us, and you should, right? Because our company is the one that provided the original material for the original study that proved that our material extended the life of Wistar rats by 90%. We are the foundation of this industry. We've been doing it now. It's been for 31 years. If you're going to trust us to answer this question, which company should you use, and you're actually going to consume the product, you probably should just buy from us.
That makes a lot of sense. On that note, let's take our first break. You're living in the solution. Welcome back to Living the Solution. We're speaking with Mr. Chris Burr and Miss Patty Greer, and their company C60 Evo is what we're speaking about. Full disclosure, I take C60 Evo and I really enjoy the product. And I want my listeners to really understand the power. We're carbon-based creatures as humans. And C60 seems to me to be one of these things that can naturally just augment and work within the bounds of our physiology. You mentioned the rat study before we took the break. Can you just briefly tell us, our listeners, about the power of that study?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll start off, and it's kind of an interesting journey to one. We're talking about a supplement that you would consume. I'll start off, and we'll kind of scare your audience a little bit, and then we'll scare them a little more, and then we'll give them some sense of relief. So again, this molecule, the three scientists who discovered it won the Nobel Prize for discovering this molecule, and that is because this molecule makes great inks, tires, batteries, and photocells. Again, that's a little scary. We're talking about a supplement. The next step is they actually thought this molecule would be toxic, so they put it in a toxicity study. And now here's where the story kind of changes course. In that study, they gave rats water, rats olive oil, and then rats olive oil with this ESS60 molecule. And we did provide that material to the researchers. In fact, I'm doing work with that particular research now. We've got a paper that's going to come out soon, which is very exciting. Again, water, olive oil, and then olive oil with ESS60. It was supposed to be a toxicity study. Instead of being toxic, the rats that really they gave the C60 Evo formula to lived 90% longer than the control group. So we talked before the break, $6,000 a gram. That's an amazing number. A 90% extension of life in mammals. It's the single longest longevity experimental result in mammals ever. And the next best kind of well-documented way to live longer is what's called calorie restriction. It's well documented in multiple types of animals that if you reduce their calorie consumption by 30%, you can extend their life by 30%. I call this the starve yourself 1/3 to death diet. And nobody seems to sign up for that one. Maybe they need some better marketing or something. But we're talking about a 90% extension of life, and you're a medical authority, so you got to be honest about this. This is a study that was in rats. They are mammals. There's a lot of genetic similarity, and we want to be pushing these studies into human trials as we can, and we're certainly doing that. That's what I'm talking about in terms of the published paper with Dr. Musa, who is involved in that original paper. But it is still a pretty phenomenal result. Not only did those Wistar, in this case they used Wistar rats, live 90% longer, they all died without tumors. So a typical Wistar rat lives 32 months, and that's what they did in this study, and they die with a known amount of tumors. So the longer they live, the more tumor mass that they have in their body. Even though the C60 Evo rats lived 90% longer, out to 62 months, none of them had any tumors. And I know we'll be talking about things. We want to make sure that everybody has a clear understanding. This does not imply any impact on cancer. We're not saying that. That's not even really implied in this study. We know things as simple as nutrition, good nutrition, exercise, and good sleep can be tumor and or cancer preventative. So that's a big difference between potentially being a cancer preventative and then dealing with a cancer that metastasized. That's a totally different scenario. What that does potentially indicate is that there are some good tumor prevention characteristics in that. Again, the FDA has not evaluated that. In fact, they haven't even evaluated our product. It is not intended to treat, diagnose, cure, or prevent any disease.
Well, one of the things that, overall, we're talking about oxidative stress, things that make us ill. I think can be stated across the board of living creatures pretty much, right? If you're acidic, if you can't repair, cellular repair doesn't happen, if you don't have the building blocks, for us, glutathione isn't one of the things that helps our body recover.